that Virginians know me. They know my record as governor when Virginia earned national recognition as a best managed state and best state for business. They know as senator, I've worked in a bipartisan way. 55 bills have become law. Recently in August, the president signed my bill that's going to make record investments in our national parks. That's going to help the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I hope they will rehire me because they want somebody that gets stuff done. Too many people come to politics and they're all about what they're against. I've got a solid record of delivering for Virginia, and particularly for Southwest Virginia, on issues like broadband, where there's so much more we need to do. Virginians know that I've always looked at issues from a bipartisan way, and I think that's what we need. We need, regardless of who's elected president, we need someone that can work with both teams to make sure that we get our economy back on track, that we get COVID under control, we take on the emerging challenges with China, and that's going to require working with folks on both sides. But it did provide healthcare coverage to 20 million Americans. It got 400,000 Virginians Medicaid coverage, and a lot of those Virginians are seniors who are in nursing homes with that Medicaid. And 3.5 million Virginians, and this is so important to me, my daughter's a type 1 diabetic. People with pre-existing conditions cannot be discriminated against because of the ACA. Now, I think it should be built upon. I think we need to bring down drug prices by giving the government power to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies. They've got way too much power. We ought to make sure that we get rid of surprise billing. But what we should not do, and this is where my opponent and I differ dramatically, is we should not get rid of the Affordable Care Act. He spent months attacking me for being the deciding vote on the ACA. Now he wants to try to wave a magic wand and somehow say he wants to protect people with pre-existing conditions, or he wants to protect the 400,000 folks with Medicaid. You can't have it both ways. You can't be opposed to the ACA. If there was a magic wand way to replace the ACA with something that still preserves people with pre-existing conditions protections, Mr. Trump or my Republican colleagues would have laid that out. And my point to listeners is, you don't have to necessarily believe either one of us. Go to the Cancer Society, go to the Diabetes Association, go to the AARP, go to their websites and see what they say. They have all said the ACA is the lifeline of preserving protections with pre-existing conditions. We will look back and say there was a classic failure in our country, that we didn't take the virus seriously enough, that we didn't have a plan on testing, that we didn't have a plan on PPE. I talked to somebody at a nursing home in Virginia last week. They were still buying masks off the black market in China. That's crazy. 7 months after Pearl Harbor, we were the arsenal of the whole world. Why can't we make enough masks so that everybody's got them for free in Virginia? And again, I think wearing masks, for example, is a sign of respect in terms of following the science. We can get COVID behind us, but we've got to follow the science. Again, this is an area where my opponent and I respectfully disagree. He thinks Donald Trump has done a great job on COVID, and he thinks wearing masks is a sign of tyranny. I couldn't disagree more. And I'm concerned going forward, where we continue to have the White House try to potentially politically interfere as we move to a vaccination. You know, I want there to be a vaccination. I want it as soon as possible. I will take it as soon as Dr. Fauci says it's safe. But we can't have the kind of political interference from the White House with the CDC and the FDA, because that undermines Virginians' confidence that the vaccine will be truly science-based and safe and effective. And we should never, never take something as important as medical science and politicize it. I've been for a version of the House package that was passed in June. The Senate never got a chance to vote on that. The Senate instead came up with a package that was from Leader McConnell that didn't even have full Republican support. There was less than 1/3 of what President Trump has offered. And I'm not going to be a rubber stamp. I guess my opponent would be for Mitch McConnell on a bad bill that would leave out restaurants, that would leave out cops, firefighters, teachers. Now, I want there to be a deal made. And I think I'll take a deal midway between Pelosi and the Trump administration. Hopefully by the time this is aired, that there will be that deal. But I also showed just yesterday that I broke with my party and said, all right, if we can do just a package helping small businesses on the so-called PPP program, I said, let's at least move to that, because Americans are hurting. Virginians are hurting. You know, I was very proud to be one of the lead negotiators with Secretary Mnuchin on the first package. And while not perfect, it prevented the economy from going into a deep recession. Those funds have run out. We need to get more assistance. And whether it's 1.82, 2.2, get a big deal done. That's what the president has called for. That's what the House has already passed. I know there's a lot of my Senate Republicans that will vote for that, but we've got to get that kind of bill on the floor of the Senate. My priorities are more investment in testing and procedures, healthcare, frontline workers. And I think those frontline workers need a little bit of extra pay because they've been on the front line for so long. And there's so many from not just our healthcare workers, but folks who work in grocery stores, folks who work in the post office. They need additional protection. We need additional assistance for small businesses. Small businesses have been holding on by their fingernails. And particularly I think about independent restaurants who are, got through the summer, but as it starts to get cold, are going to be under more and more duress. I want to make sure we do provide some additional assistance to our local governments so that we don't lay off cops and firefighters and teachers in the midst of the pandemic. And something I've been working on since I was governor, and now I think everyone agrees finally, is we need more assistance for broadband. Broadband is an economic necessity, not just during the pandemic, but on a going forward basis. And I think, frankly, the president laid out a plan that was pretty darn good. Pelosi had a plan. I hope by the time this airs, they've made a deal midway. If they haven't, I think we ought to take the president's proposal up and find ways to amend it and get it done. I think Virginians and Americans are pretty smart. They see hypocrisy when Mitch McConnell and the Republicans said, we're not going to vote on an Obama Supreme Court nominee. And now we voted on a Trump Supreme Court nominee literally days before an election. And I just think we shouldn't have one set of rules for the Republicans and one set of rules for the Democrats. This is a country that ought to be ruled by rule of law. And while I have respect for Judge Barrett's intellect, I felt this process should not have been jammed through. And what it really is at stake, because assuming Judge Barrett was appointed and confirmed, the first thing out of the box will be the Supreme Court within 2 weeks will take up a lawsuit supported by the Trump administration, supported by my opponent, supported by the Republicans, that would do away with the Affordable Care Act. So in many ways, this vote was not only about the process, but it was about whether we ought to keep the Affordable Care Act and build upon it, or whether we ought to replace it and repeal it. And frankly, we've not seen any legitimate plan on replacement. The idea that we're going to simply do private health savings accounts or other market-based mechanisms, if that had worked, that would have been tried successfully years ago. It just doesn't work. I do think we need policing reform. And I've worked with Senator Kamala Harris on something called the Justice and Policing Act that would get rid of things like chokeholds and no-knock warrants, that would make sure that if a law enforcement officer had a bad record, that he couldn't simply move from one community to another. But it also puts additional resources into training because too often we send law enforcement officers on something that should be dealt with by mental health professionals. And we need that additional training. We don't provide near enough training for law enforcement officers in America compared to Canada or many of our European neighbors. But what I don't support is any effort to defund the police. My opponent, others may say that, but my record is clear. When I was governor, I made record investments in our state police. I made record investments in our sheriff's departments. I stand with law enforcement in making sure they do their job. And if my opponent says otherwise, he's just not telling the truth. Even before COVID, our economy was changing. It's why we need to make sure that every home in Virginia, no matter what your zip code, has access to broadband. It's why we need to make sure that you should be able to live wherever you want in Southside and Southwest Virginia and not have to move to Northern Virginia, get a world-class job. I've worked on that as governor. I want to keep working on that as senator. I think we need to make sure in the COVID relief package, we give some additional support for renters, for example. So they're not simply having their rent delayed, then to have the kind of roof cave in when it's all due. And I think it's time that we go ahead and refinance the interest rates on student debt down to these record low levels. So many young people are not getting the same kind of fair shot that I had because they're so overburdened with student debt. I'm the first person in my family to have ever graduated from college. I came out with student debt, but I was able to get through it. If I came out with the levels of student debt that many people, young people do now, I wouldn't be sitting here. So I think in America, we need to guarantee you that fair shot. Can't guarantee you success, but you ought to have that fair shot. And that's been what I've tried to do as governor, what I've tried to work on as senator. And right now, when we face COVID, an economic recession, a rising China, we need people who've got a proven record of actually delivering, who actually know that it's more about the future versus the past, not the Democrat versus the Republican. And respectfully, I ask for the folks in Southwest Virginia to rehire me. My opponent has quickly learned one thing about being a politician, and that is that he has not told the truth on a whole series of issues, and that's extraordinarily disappointing. But at the end of the day, what I'm counting on is that Virginians know me. They know me, they know my record, they know what I did as governor when Virginia got national awards for best managed state, best state for business. They know my background as a business guy, was somebody who knows how to get things done and meet a payroll, read a balance sheet. And they know in the Senate that I've got a history of working together in a bipartisan way. I point to my work on the Senate Intelligence Committee. As we go into this election, one of the things we have to be careful of is foreign interference or people being concerned about the sanctity of our ballot box. I'm extraordinarily proud that the Senate Intelligence Committee has been the only functioning bipartisan committee with me as vice chairman. So I think that record of getting things done is what I hope people will evaluate me on. Are there things we can do better? Absolutely. Are there things that we still need to take care of, like broadband and making sure everybody has the educational opportunity to actually bring down student debt as well, to go ahead and take the next step on healthcare and have the government negotiate on drug prices so we can lower the outrageous cost of drugs in this country? Yes, there's more to do. But we live in the greatest country in the world, and it's been the honor of my life to serve as both governor and senator, and I hope I get the opportunity to continue. When my opponent continues to misrepresent, that to me is the actions of somebody who's kind of a classic politician. I think that's the last thing the U.S. Senate needs one more of, is someone that doesn't tell the straight story.